Hello and welcome to part 3 of my Saw VII Rewrite. If you're watching this, then hopefully that means that you have read parts 1 and 2. If not, no worries, I will link those documents as well as part 3 in the description to this video. As in the last 2 parts, if you decide to leave any feedback, that is absolutely encouraged. But if you are watching this at some point in the future when the rest of the script has been released, I do ask that in the comment section to this video, you not comment about anything beyond the first 3 parts. Before we dive in, the artwork in the thumbnail for this video was once again created by Luke Headland, who has graciously allowed me to use his work for these videos. You can find a lot more of Luke's art, Saw related and otherwise, on his social media pages, which are linked in the description of this video. If you have not yet read up to and including part 3, I ask that you please not proceed with the rest of this video until you have done that, at which point, if you feel like it, please do come back. With that said, let's talk about part 3. In Saw 3, we see that when Amanda goes home from her deposition, that John is in her apartment and he reveals himself as Jigsaw. Chronologically, the next thing that we see of Amanda and John is that she has agreed to be his apprentice. And speaking for myself, I was always interested in seeing what exactly happened in that conversation. In my view and in my interpretation of the story, I think Amanda, being the very first person to survive a Jigsaw game, I think that is absolutely why John came to her. In part 2, we talked about how Amanda's survival and John's happiness or relief that she survived, even though he has this reason to be angry with her, he views that relief as validation that his motivations are sincere, that he really did want to help Amanda and that he wasn't putting her through this because he hated her or because he wanted to punish her. That said, as the first survivor, Amanda is really the first person that can attest to whether or not this experiment that John has been attempting is actually successful. Did Amanda, as the first survivor, benefit from what she went through? And in my eyes, that's what John was there to find out. And he was willing to give up his freedom if it turned out that he had done these things for nothing. It was important to me that he put his fate in Amanda's hands. In the past, I've talked about how the version of Jigsaw in the original Saw is kind of at odds with the interpretation of the character that gets fleshed out over the course of the sequels. As the films go on, John talks about how he despises murder and murderers and that everybody deserves a chance. But in the original Saw, that's not really his characterization. A lot of what's presented in the limited context of the original movie shows that Jigsaw doesn't really mind killing, but his main goal is to just test human nature and people's survival instincts. One of the things I would have liked to see from the conclusion to this series is a sort of reconciliation of what we see in Saw 1 with what we later learn about the Jigsaw character. And just one example of that is what we see happen with Tapp and Jeff and Singh in the Stygian warehouse. In part 2, I talked about how it seems pretty clear to me that Detective Tapp was intentionally lured to that warehouse And I think that what happened there was a staged test of sorts by Jigsaw. But I think that John's use of the blade and cutting Tapp's throat, I think the idea that John was able to do that in such an intentional way to avoid killing Tapp, I think that's a bit of a stretch. But what I do think might have been the case is that, he does it so fast and he does it without really looking and he's got the hood. I think maybe what he had intended to do was just slash across Tapp's chest, catching him off guard and wounding him enough so that John could flee. What I think is interesting as far as Sing is the idea that John didn't necessarily anticipate that Tapp would bring Sing with him. When Hoffman first learns that Amanda survived, he does not seriously consider the possibility that she might actually change her behavior. Again, he has a much more cynical view of people than John does. He sees them as irredeemable. And so then when John proposes the idea of Amanda joining them in the work, I think that that is really offensive to Hoffman, that one of these people that he views as unworthy gets chosen by John to do what Hoffman feels is his role to do. By this point, he has embraced the idea of carrying on the Jigsaw mantle, although in a completely different way than John intended. So for John to now suggest that Hoffman should have to share that mantle, specifically with someone that Hoffman views as unworthy, I think that that really upsets Hoffman. And I think pretty much right from the beginning of John bringing someone else in to be another apprentice, Hoffman becomes quite territorial over the Jigsaw legacy, which he views himself as the heir to. In Saw 3, the last thing we see of Eric Matthews is him, fully conscious, yelling out and taunting Amanda. And then we see Amanda turns around and walks back towards him. And before we see anything else that happened there, it cuts back to the present day, and Amanda says that she killed Eric Matthews. And John says, no, that's what you thought. And obviously in Saw 4, we learn that Matthews did survive. But what we don't see is what happened when Amanda went back. The next thing chronologically that we see of Eric is that he's laying flat on the ground, unconscious, with blood coming out of his mouth. And then somebody drags him down the tunnels. We also see that the knife that Eric had, that he was threatening Amanda with in those tunnels, which he got from the corpse of Xavier in the bathroom. In the present day of Saw 3, Amanda now has that knife. So this is one more thing that tells us that Amanda did go back to Eric and something else did happen. But we're kind of missing a link between what we see in Saw 3 and what we see in Saw 4. And so it was kind of important to me to show that missing link and establish why Amanda thinks that she killed Eric when it turns out she didn't. She hits him so hard with that pipe that he's knocked unconscious, and I do think that when she doesn't go through with cutting his throat, I think she walks away under the impression that he's alive, but the fact that he never turns up over the next 6 months, that he's still considered missing in the public eye, I think Amanda kind of assumes that he must have died in those tunnels, probably due to the damage she did by hitting him with the pipe. So something I always found curious about Hoffman having killed Seth Baxter, and then later on in the timeline, the FBI specifically are trying to figure out who this other accomplice is. I always wondered why Hoffman wasn't under more suspicion earlier on. And I always thought that an interesting answer to that might be that several of the next Jigsaw targets after Seth Baxter were also connected to the various detectives working the Jigsaw case. It makes sense to me that John and Hoffman would decide to do this to try and undermine anybody eventually pointing to him and saying, well, he had motive for this. If you can point to other Jigsaw victims and say the same thing about the other detectives working the case, then suddenly Hoffman's motive doesn't mean as much. If you watch the scene in Saw 3 where Amanda puts Adam in the bathtub and throws the key in, there's this really fascinating moment where John is looking into the camera through the mirror, and Amanda looks over her shoulder at him, seemingly to make sure that he's not looking, and then she moves towards Adam's feet. And then we cut back to John, and when we get back to Amanda, she's no longer by his feet, and she's turning off the faucet. And that's the thing to keep in mind, is that the faucet is on the center of the wall, on the side of the tub. So it seems to me the only thing that she could have been doing by Adam's feet is putting his foot through the cord attached to the bath plug, basically ensuring that when he wakes up, he's going to kick the plug out of the drain, and the water and the key will go down the drain. We can surmise from the end of Saw 1 that when John tells Adam his key is in the bathtub, that he did not intend for the key to go down the drain. It therefore follows that John would not have instructed Amanda to arrange the cord and Adam's foot in such a way to make that happen. And obviously Adam being left in the bathroom causes all of this guilt for Amanda. So it never made sense to me, and I don't think there are a lot of people that ever interpreted it this way, but yeah, it never made sense to me that Amanda would have done that in a malicious attempt to cause Adam's death. But that then raises the question of why she would have done it. And as the series of films progressed, and then by the end of Saw 6, where we find out that Hoffman had some degree of influence over Amanda's actions, that's where my mind went to the idea that Hoffman told her to do this. And that her guilt throughout that scene, and then later when she comes back to suffocate Adam, much of that guilt is rooted in the fact that she went along with Hoffman's much more malicious intentions for Adam. What I saw as a critical part of the Saw story, that is the story of John Kramer as Jigsaw, is his decision to, first of all, recruit Hoffman as someone to carry on his work, and how that apparently evolved into recruiting several people to do that. I think the turn that Hoffman takes, starting with Donnie, and his complete rejection of the idea that people can be rehabilitated, which is obviously at the core of what John's philosophy is. Obviously, that creates in John not only the need to find somebody else to carry on what he actually wants his work to be, but also this fear that Hoffman could warp his legacy and his teachings. And so I think Amanda asking if she can help him, I think that's kind of the moment where it occurs to him that the people that survive and pass their tests really have the best potential to embrace his philosophy and carry it on. And so if that is the case, then it potentially recontextualizes the bathroom game, the main series of events from the original Saw movie, in an interesting way. And in a way that does what I was just talking about, where it reconciles what we see in Saw 1 with what we learn about what Jigsaw believes in the later films. If we view the events of the original Saw as John trying to recruit these people and trying to test their reluctance to kill, then that makes the original film interesting in a new way. If the point of Gordon's game was not to get him to kill Adam, but to push him to the absolute edge and see if he still refuses to murder someone else, that to me really recontextualizes the original film in a cool way. And in my eyes, that would extend to Zepp, that not only was he testing Lawrence's reluctance to kill, but that's what he was doing with Zepp as well. Of course, John would need to make sure that the daughter and the wife were not in actual physical danger. And considering that none of the previous films ever really established what Hoffman's role in the bathroom game was, or if he had a role, I thought the idea of him being with Zepp potentially explains a few things. Not the least of which is why would Zepp not have gone to a hospital instead of potentially having to kill a mother and child. Of course, where everything goes wrong is that Hoffman decides to sabotage this plan. I don't think Hoffman is so far gone that he at any point intended to put Allison or Diana in harm's way. But I do think that his frustration with this idea of John bringing in these other people to this work, which again, Hoffman views as his own legacy at this point. Not to mention that these people could actually have potential leverage over him the way John originally did. The more people that get brought into this, the more people that know incriminating things about him. And so when Hoffman gives Zepp the loaded gun, I think that there are a lot of people that Hoffman would not have minded getting killed, including Zepp, Lawrence, Adam, and Tapp. The earlier scene in which Hoffman visits Tapp kind of establishes in Hoffman's mind that while Tapp is kind of crazy now, he is still smart, and he is absolutely hell-bent on catching the person or persons responsible for Singh's death. And so I think after that conversation, that's where it becomes in Hoffman's best interest to get rid of Tapp. So by giving Zepp the loaded gun, he creates this chaos in which it's certain that bodies are going to drop. And the only person besides Allison and Diana that I think Hoffman wasn't particularly trying to get killed was actually John. I think he recognized that as a real possibility and he was okay with it. But I think Hoffman does still have quite a bit of admiration and respect for John. And I do think part of what motivates him is a jealousy for these other apprentices. I think Hoffman is firmly rooted in his beliefs about people and about what Jigsaw should be. But I think he wants John to see that he's right and to get John's approval. So yeah, in my opinion, John would really be the one person in that bathroom that Hoffman wasn't actively hoping would get killed, even though he did accept that as a possibility. But okay, I think that's everything I have for part 3, but I hope you guys will come back for part 4.
Hello there. If you'd like to be notified when more videos like this one arrive, just click the circle to subscribe. In the meantime, you can click either of the 2 boxes to check out other content from this channel. Or don't. The choice